Hello, and thanks for joining us. I have with us today Chris Nazarenus. Chris, it's so wonderful to finally be putting this together and chatting with you today. Chris and I had a chance to meet on a panel in South Africa in November of 2019, which, considering the last skip year that we all experienced, it seems like a million years ago, but yesterday at the same time. And Chris and I met because we both have a passion for education, specifically practitioner physician education in the cannabis space. And on the panel, we had a chance to really explore each other's businesses and learn what makes us tick. And so I want to spend time with Chris and Marijuana 411 and her company and learn a little bit about how we can work together as an industry to help bring the education level up in physician space. And many people know when we got into this space, I like to focus on the 3 E's: to engage, educate, and empower. And so we were on a hunt when we got into the cannabis space, coming from traditional pharma, because we saw that lack. And we came across Marijuana 411 and Chris and what they were doing, the work they're doing. We obviously were super excited to have the opportunity to collaborate. So Chris, welcome to our show. And I'd like to start with asking if you could just give us a brief overview of Marijuana 411 and who you are and what you bring to the cannabis marketplace.
Sounds perfect. Thank you for having me. As usual, great to see you. It's been far too long, but I guess, with these virtual summits that we've been doing, we can still collaborate, which I think is really important. So I love your engage, educate, empower kind of mantra, because it certainly fits in with what we do at Medical Marijuana 411. We are 11 years old, which a lot of people are surprised by. And I think that one of the things that's really intriguing is that for us, it started similar to a lot of the medical professionals or people in the field, or probably even you. I think you had the same experience. It's one story, one patient, one conversation that starts this whole ball rolling. And what we found 11 years ago is that my business partner and I both had patients in our family. And there was a void out there, even in, cannabis, is that it was very much the stoner culture, which obviously there's a lot of people that were the pioneers and leading the charge for legalization, which I appreciate. But there really wasn't that medical perspective of how and why did it work? Why was cannabis an option for so many different ailments, and what were the science and the research, what was behind it, right? And so we set out, my business partner said, I want you to build me a site. And it's like, okay, how are we going to monetize it? He said, don't worry about it. He said, just tell the patient story. So we started with that. We both came from the content space in motorsports, kind of ironically. And so we followed those same principles and put forth a website that not only was very engaging, but also had now a social media following of 1 million fans, which we still have. All organic. Anybody knows in the cannabis space, it's impossible for advertising, and we don't even want to go to the banking, all those different scenarios that everybody goes through, including us, and we don't touch any plant product. But snap to where we are now is that we happen to be at the right place at the right time. I live in Washington State. I'm outside of Seattle in Redmond, and happen to know, because of the I-502 legislation here for adult use, is that education would be a key criteria. Anyone working in a medical dispensary would have to have a certified consultant, and we decided that's where we're going to throw our hat in the ring. So that's how it all started. We are one of 3 approved companies here in Washington. We really pushed the envelope to be the online provider. For us, it was a technology play and a content play. And that quickly led to see that there was a definite void for medical professionals. And that's really where we filled the gap. So Medical Marijuana 411 has come in with now authoring continuing medical education courses at Category 1 level for nurses, physicians, pharmacists. We now are approved as far as South Africa for the healthcare provider equivalent in South Africa with our partner Chiba Africa. We launched in Japan. We just soft launched in Europe, and just signed an agreement this week for Mexico and Latin America. So we know that medical need for education is not just a US one, it's a global conversation. So that's kind of what we do.
I think one of the challenges we have in our space is people look at cannabis, marijuana, which path is it going to go down? It's going to go down the consumer packaged goods and be more like alcohol and cigarettes, or is it going to go down the OTC and over-the-counter route and be more like Mucinex or Metamucil or other branded OTC products? And that's a big question mark, And when frankly, when Canopy and Constellation got together, everybody was, oh my gosh, we're going to lose our medical facing opportunity because it's an alcohol company that made the big investment. But I think that's why it's so important to get from the mountaintop and scream about the medicinal properties of this plant. And what's happening now, I like to say in our world in pharma, billions of dollars have been spent on direct-to-consumer DTC advertising. Ask your doctor if X fill in the blank product is right for you. To get a patient to go to a doctor to ask the doctor about a brand. And that's uniquely American, by the way. It's only in North America that we have that. That doesn't exist in other parts of the world. But cannabis is interesting because it is truly being driven by the patient. So cannabis companies, whether you're a CBD brand or in the future a THC brand that's more mainstream in the medicinal system, you get to shortcut it because your patients are coming to the doctor and already asking about cannabis. And unfortunately, the doctor's response is, I don't know. And it's getting to the point now where we're getting critical mass where the doctor is being asked enough about it that the doctors are seeking education because they need to have an answer for the patients. So is that what you're seeing in the marketplace as well?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
North America versus international, kind of where the medical profession is, because I'd love to hear your take on that.
It's consistent. That's what we're finding. And whether it's, I was on the Mexico Cannabis Summit last week, and it was very geared towards medical professionals, but it's the same problem, is that there's a gap in learning, and where medical professionals are feeling inadequate, honestly, is that their patients know more than they do. So a patient comes in and says, can I reduce my opioid use through cannabinoids? And that seems like, well, what does that even mean, right? And here's the stats are, is that I think and I, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty close with the percentages. I think it's 27% of all medical states have seen a reduction in opioid scripts written and overdose deaths, 27%. And then in adult use states, it goes up to 32%, which is showing that patients are actually now taking on the role of a medical professional to reduce something that could kill them, right? We have a huge problem with the opioid crisis. So I think that it's interesting. But back to medical professionals, I think it's right around 17% are actually taught they're taught about the endocannabinoid system, and the endocannabinoid system is the largest receptor system in the human body. So to know that only 17% of medical professionals are actually being versed in what is our largest receptor system is crazy. And it's interesting because cannabinoids actually fit like a lock and key within our own receptor systems. And that's where the science is showing, even though we need more research in science, that's where cannabis can help fill that gap within your ailment perspective and why it actually works within the human body. And also animals. I mean, that's the other crazy part. You can't even ignore what's happening, especially I was surprised within Latin America and Mexico, the veterinary focus. We've had now seminars out of Japan, strong veterinary focus. They're actually more well-versed in the endocannabinoid system than a lot of our human people, medical professionals are. So I think that, back to your OTC question, the Farm Bill passing in 2018, I think for legalization, it's a plus, but I think we let the horses out of the barn too fast, is that we now have problems with testing and is it researched and what's credible, and there's so much misinformation out there. I don't personally like the complete over-the-counter solution. I think that you need to have it somewhat regulated, but obviously the Schedule I status is inhibiting where this could be a very powerful medicine. And if you're not familiar, the Schedule I status in the United States, and it kind of guides the rest of the world, is that by definition, cannabis as a Schedule I drug has no medicinal value and is a highly addictive substance. So, that's kind of difficult when you're trying to get research done on something that really has no medicinal value by definition.
My favorite on that subject matter is that the government has determined in the United States that cocaine is a Schedule II, which
Correct.
means that they have determined that cannabis is more dangerous than cocaine. And every layperson and every medical professional knows that's not the case now. That
Right.
might not have been the case a decade ago. They might have thought that, but we now have a better understanding of science to know that's not the case. One of the things that you mentioned is the Farm Bill and education is, in pharma space, obviously the way we market to physicians has changed dramatically over the last decade. In the old days, you used to be able to bring lunches to the office, and and that's what PharmaCentra, our sister company, would do. Is we still do that after the pandemic. Hopefully, we'll be able to send lunches. Is reaching out to physicians' offices to send them samples, to send them discount patient kits, discount information, discount copay cards, things like that.
Mhm.
Before the Sunshine Act was passed, they used to give like really nice gifts and T-shirts and swag and stethoscopes, branded stethoscopes and things like that. When the Sunshine Act was passed, all of a sudden it changed. There was a gear change, and all of a sudden we were forced as an industry in the pharma, marketing, life sciences industry to focus on education. Med ed is what we call it, because you can educate a doctor, but you can't really sell them. And so the Farm Bill is actually an interesting opportunity, because the Farm Bill says you can't make any claims. You cannot make claims about any product. I don't care. The only claim you can make is that there is CBD in it, and stay on the right side of the law. But what you can talk about is cannabinoid science. You can talk about the endocannabinoid system, that a doctor can understand how the endocannabinoid system works, so they can talk to a patient about it. And so that branding opportunity is virgin territory. So that's one of the areas that we want to work with medical marijuana 411, is to get this collateral, to get the physician desk references, I love the posters behind you, because
Oh, thank you.
everybody, I was just at the doctor just this week for a follow-up to a checkup, and there were some posters, and I'm waiting for the doctor to come, and I'm wandering around the office and, looking at all the little things and knickknacks and the posters. And I really think having a poster with endocannabinoid science on the wall could really be a breaker for a physician. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I agree. I think that one of the big things that we accomplished in our tenure is the publishing of the Medical Cannabis Handbook. This is with Springer Publishing. Now, Springer historically is one of the most reputable medical publishers in the world, right? So for them to finally say that cannabis is medicine, and to be able to have these full color and actually talk about dosing, right? Here's the biggest conversation that medical professionals are asking, and what we hear on our comment forums and that kind of thing, is that the whole how to medicate, you've got a botanical medicine, is like, how does that interact? Why does a patient need to journal some of their responses to make sure that they're getting the quality of medication, and also learning how to self medicate and titrate, right? There's different ways of the bioavailability. There's also the mantra with edibles: start low, go slow. Everybody's heard of somebody, or a journalist that's had a terrible experience because they didn't follow dosing recommendations. And I think that's where we have a responsibility, whether you're on the producer processor side, right? Is that and I love what you guys have brought from pharma and pharma marketing historically now into this new economy in cannabis, right? Because a lot of people came through the growing ranks, through it was a different pathway for many of us, me included, right? I didn't grow up, pounding the drum for legalization. I just was curious how it worked and why it was helping my brother. And so with that, I think it's interesting with your approach is now merging the education part of it with what you've done historically, is to bring a very customer service centric, empowering model into the cannabis market. And I think it's brilliant because I think that you can merge both the education pieces, whether it's online, it's books, it's posters, to get that conversation started, right? And I think that that's where you certainly are filling a gap on your own end. And I think where the merging of what we're doing jointly certainly just helps spread the message based on research and based on science.
Help us understand CMEs, continuing medical education credit.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really important aspect of your business model, and obviously what we're trying to accomplish together is
Right.
What is a CME for the layperson, and why does a doctor care?
Man, that is such a loaded question. So when we have multiple courses. We start in what's the classic consultant or budtender course, right? And ours is excellent, still based on science, and it's also based on the law. So you look at the legal perspective of not only the Schedule I, but we want to make sure that budtender, that first person that a patient and a medical professional's patient is the front-facing person that they're going to interact with on that first visit, right? But what you want to make sure is that they're not taking the place of that doctor interaction. They are not a medical professional. By law, they cannot give medical advice. And so that's part of that whole training. So to then our advanced medical.
It's just important what you can't say is what you can say.
Yeah, the cost of violation is so huge in this industry. And that's one of the things that, people ask me, where are we going to be in a year, or what, when we grow up, what are we going to be? I said, it's going to be a compliance company. We're going to be combining not only continuing medical education for the physician, pharmacist, nursing market, right, with companies, larger players in the space, and then with bringing people like you in who understand the service part of it and how to kind of connect all the dots to helping make sure that HR is taken care of. There's a whole concept called looping that started in Colorado that cost sweet leaf dispensaries millions of dollars, and the owners went to jail because the cost of violation is great. You've got to understand the law, and that's kind of the baseline of what we always do. So back to the CMEs, which in coin terms is continuing medical education credits or continuing education credits, since we deal also with nursing CNEs and CPEs for the pharmacist market. Critically important, annually, medical professionals have to have a certain number of CEs to remain compliant, right? That's part of what they have. So now with the whole cannabis conversation coming up through the ranks, there are very few courses that meet the CE requirements. And I saw it as a business person, like, we can fill this gap, right? And what I didn't know is that I would spend tens of thousands of dollars getting denied because people were too concerned about the cannabis conversation. We had a major player, ACCME provider, that we got down to the final check marks, had done everything perfectly. We knew that we met all the criteria. They even told us we met all the criteria, but there was one board member who had big dollars who said, I'm anti-cannabis, and we lost again. It was probably a $30,000 application fee. So it's crazy, right? So although I'm incredibly proud that we are blazing the trail, no pun intended, for the CE market within cannabis education for that medical professional community, is where I see it lacking even in our own courses, is that we have to be very light on dosing and how to medicate. We can't talk about it, right? But we can create curriculums for we have more states approved than any other company in the world to provide that medical provider education. You can create curriculums that then you can help fill those gaps, where our CE program is kind of this one ball. And again, that whole Schedule I status is what guides what can go into those courses, right? But then you can fill in from how to dose, how to medicate, dosing, some larger conversations of the ailment specific research that may be in CE language too light to meet what they want as a full research standard for a Schedule I drug, right? But certainly has credibility in the conversation. Anecdotal anecdotal conversations from patients really started changing a lot of people's minds, even over the last 50 years, because people that were still using were gaining and getting benefit from the plant. But from a bigger perspective, like some of the bigger players in the market, you mentioned Canopy earlier, is that they now have a responsibility, in my opinion, and I think this is where we've really had some great conversations, not only in South Africa, but now over this virtual platform, is that there's a responsibility for them to continue to help educate the medical professional, not only just on product, but science. And again, how do you answer those questions as those come up? It's that three-pronged. It's the producer processor. So in that Canopy world, it's us providing the education, and then from you providing that service, marketing, hand-holding, that true one-on-one interaction that makes you a world-class service provider. That's what you guys do best.
Yeah, one of the things we try and dissect, and the reason we're so excited to work with you, is what goes into doctor recommendation. When I go to the gastroenterologist for my annual or every 10-year colonoscopy, I'm not that old. And, he says you got to take more fiber. You need to take Metamucil. He doesn't take psyllium husk. He says take Metamucil. And by the way, he's got a whole box of samples, and he hands me a whole pack of them. Here you go. Take the whole box. Take as many as you want. And you know what? To this day, I'm loyal to. I can go to CVS. I can go to the CVS brand, but I buy the Metamucil brand because doctors are interested in a couple of things. There's safety first, do no harm, and efficacy. That's why physicians are so hesitant to recommend cannabis or cannabis products, is because they've been told for so many years it's a class 1 drug, which means it's dangerous. But they don't know the difference between all the different CBG or CBN or CBD or THC. They don't know the difference between any of these. And so if they can be educated on, they can make recommendations for patients, safety, efficacy, and usability. If a brand can own that channel and educate a doctor, they're going to own that doctor forever. And a typical internist will carry 1,500, 2,000, as many as 3,000 patients. Some will carry even more. And the reason it's such a lucrative market, the reason that every pharma company, every OTC company in the world wants to get doctor recommendation, it's the coveted holy grail, is because they have so many patients. And if a patient trusts, our numbers show that a doctor, the lifetime value of a doctor recommendation for a CBD company could exceed 6 figures. Easily, just for a CBD brand. So the cannabis companies are starting to figure this out. They're starting to figure out that they need to communicate with doctors and physicians in a way they like to be communicated with, and obviously CMEs and physician education. And I love your PDR, your physician desk reference. I mean, I grew up in an era, I'll be 60 this year. I grew up in an era of the Merck manual. My mother always had the Merck manual. When any of us got sick, she'd break open the Encyclopedia Merck manual, and she'd call Dr. Brampton, who was a friend of ours. And we didn't have cell phones, but she'd call him. I've seen the Merck manual. Yeah, that could be it. So the Merck manual, it's branded forever, Merck. I mean, we didn't call it the encyclopedia. We called it Merck.
Right. Oh, that's so funny. It's so true. It's like
that kind of the whole exists in cannabis. Nobody owns that space. And what gets me so excited is that someone is going to be the first mover. And I can't wait to see who it is, and I can't wait to see how it evolves. But I know that education will be the cornerstone of that move.
I tend to agree. And it's interesting because I think that, back to the whole farm bill and just CBD and being able to have over-the-counter CBD medications at your CVS, et cetera, right? That's all good. But a lot of people, the biggest questions I get from time to time, like when I'm going to the gym or whatever, is THC bad now? Was that the bad? It's like, no. It's just different components of the plant. And there's still like this whole concept of full spectrum, the entourage effect, the whole bit. And the thing that I really love about trying to explain the whole CBD, because there's certain instances where you do want THC, right? Like topical. For me, it's you want as much THC, a 1-to-1 ratio, not going to get high from topical, right? But you need that for that CB2 receptor. but the mitigation of the bad stuff that THC does within your body, CBD does, right? So that's some of the other topics of conversation that are really interesting, is that one of our advisors, Dr. Greg Smith, says it best, is that if you're high and you feel like you're high, you have over medicated. And that's the piece that you now taken too much of that substance of THC, the psychoactive component of cannabis.
I like to say THC will get you high, and that is a side effect.
That's exactly right.
And seek that side effect in a recreational form, and some people don't. But that can be managed, and there is medicine in it regardless.
Yeah, it's interesting because people, like a lot of people assume that once you go rec legal here in New York, the conversation is now, it's just like there's everybody smoking pot, in the streets and running around with tie-dye shirts.
We have a great guide in Colorado, and you alluded to it earlier. And we've had this legal experiment in Colorado, and we see. I think the most stunning part of the experiment is the opioid death, and I like to. Yes. The opioid death reduction exceeds 25%, which is staggering from a public health perspective. If you get double digits, that's something to write home about. And to get above 25%, and that was my aha moment, that cannabis should be a component of the solution to the opioid crisis. It should be a cornerstone. It should be the tip of the sword, because when you see numbers like that, states should get excited, because the cost to society is staggering. And not only it, but they with their tax revenue, they've been able to do some really neat things for society. It's been a net positive all around, and people are really
absolutely. Yeah, and we also have a Springer public title with them, the minimizing opioid use through cannabinoids, and that's based on the science. So exactly to that point. And back to the adult use, I think that the naysayers really believe that all of a sudden it is just recreational. Everybody wants to use it like a glass of wine, and there are those users, but they're not. It's more consistent that now that person can go in because they have pain, they can't sleep, they went to the gym and they're older like me, and you need a topical just to help reduce that inflammation. It's still, the patient is still going into that dispensary as a patient, not as a, oh, I want to go get high user. And I agree.
The medical community needs to catch up, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And one of the last points with all of us going through COVID last year is that, and it was probably about this time because we locked down early here in Washington. So it was about 2 weeks after, because we had 2 weeks that we couldn't leave. And so all of a sudden you're going to the grocery store. Well, across from the grocery store I go to is my dispensary, but one of our clients in a dispensary here in Redmond. And all of a sudden you're seeing exactly what everybody feared, is that they were doing transactions, cash transactions, mind you, because there is no credit card processing, in a parking lot with masks on a card table and a brick. The world didn't come to an end, but patients were lined up, socially distanced. And across the nation, you look at the US, is that cannabis was deemed an essential business because it was medically needed for all the different, situations. One of the things that I really wanted to find a sponsor for is what I called the veterans stimulus package, is that we would give a very low cost or find some sort of corporate sponsor to buy a certain number of courses for veterans in those markets, that they could be educated as a budtender. And then as the new economy opened up again and they could actually go physically to work, be trained. But someday that will happen for sure.
Chris, there's so many opportunities, there's so many different directions we can go, and I'm so glad you were able to join us today. And
of course,
you're passionate about the 3 E's, just like we are, to engage, educate, and empower. And cannabis is one of the first crowdsourced businesses out there, and I think medical professionals are now raising their hand and saying, I need help, because my patients know more than I do.
Exactly right. You're exactly right on.
And I think that's the opportunity that faces us. So I thank you so much for joining us today. And I look forward to doing this again really soon.
Thank you so much. And again, always great to talk to you. Can't wait to see you in person again, and we'll talk very soon.
Terrific. Thanks.
Bye.